Well, currently I'm serving as a member of parliament, congressman, I think you would say in the US, for the Alternative for Germany party, AfD, which is, I would say, labeled as the bad opposition in Germany. We make a great difference in politics in Germany. I think we're the only party that has understood that we need to make politics for their own people and against foreign interests that have always been the most important argument for any important policy decision making in Germany. We, as the Alternative for Germany, we criticize ideologically driven environmental policies. We criticize also policies that tend to isolate the West from Eurasia, from the BRICS countries. And we criticize policies that ruin our production of electricity at a certain competitive price level. And for all of that, we are demonized and we are being seen as the new fascists, as the new Nazis, etc. Wow. But of course, it's only the attribution which is given to us from the outside, and we ourselves think and believe that we are liberals and that we adhere to the strong belief that people can take decisions for themselves in the best way.
Well, speaking of being vilified, I spent 20 years as the spokesman for Lyndon LaRouche. And LaRouche is someone who fought for the ideas of the American system, the traditional ideas of the founding fathers, as the United States is an anti-colonial power. And for that, he was labeled an extremist, a left-wing extremist, Reiner, for a while, then a right-wing extremist, a Nazi, a communist. And what we've always said is that, listen to what we're saying. Debate us honestly. Right. Don't try and put a label on us. Now, the reason that it's important that Reiner's with us today is that in a couple of days, Joe Biden is going to be wheeled into Germany. And there's going to be a meeting at the air base where the so-called Ukrainian contact group will be meeting. And Biden is going to promise more aid to Ukraine, more billions. We just $8 billion in the last week given to Ukraine. And for what? To kill Ukrainians and to kill Russians. Yeah. And for what reason? Well, a lot of it has to do with what Reiner is an expert in, the question of geopolitics, and the idea that Germany has been attacked for many, many years, going back to the 1880s, 1890s, and even before, because it represented a European country with ties to Russia and potential with China. And now with the emergence of the BRICS, with the collapse of the Western financial system, which is unmistakable. All you have to do is look at what's happening in North Carolina. The fact that we don't have enough money to fund these wars and at the same time take care of Americans who are losing homes, water, because of the flooding from Hurricane Helene. So my association with Reiner came up when I've been living in Germany now for 7 years, watching the growth of the AfD, the Alternative for Deutschland, and watching the attacks on them for precisely the same reason that we were always attacked, and that you, Mel, are also attacked.
Right.
The idea of fighting for truth and fighting for the people to have a say in government. And I'll just add one final point. The reason this is especially important is that there were 3 state elections in the last month in Germany, which are pointing to the future. And in each one, the ruling coalition was smashed because of their commitment to the war, their commitment to the green policy, their unwillingness to do anything about the immigration problem. And the party that gained the most was the party that Reiner represents. And I'll say this, he's a fine representative of the AfD. So Reiner, maybe you can start out by just saying a little bit about what you think should come out of this Rammstein meeting when Biden shows up to try and once again give marching orders to Germany as a vassal state.
Right.
Well, that's a very good question. We all do not know what will come out of that meeting, but we can be sure that for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, it's of utmost importance that no bad news comes from Ukraine before the presidential elections in the US, because they need to keep this conflict afloat. They need to cover up all the losses that the West has suffered in that proxy war in Ukraine. If the Western citizens, if the US citizens knew the complete dimension of the losses of the retreat also of the West and the Western influence in the world that has occurred in the past 2.5 years, since 24th of February of 2022, when Russia invaded Ukraine, then they surely would not vote for Kamala Harris, but they would vote for a model which is more nationally oriented, the model of Donald Trump, Make America Great Again, and leave the post of being the world's policeman and overstretching the capacities of the United States, which have become more and more limited in this more and more multipolar world. Well, I would say we need to distinguish, because in Germany, above all in Germany, but also in other countries of Europe, we are also living a life in a bubble created by mainstream media, which are maybe not controlled, but at least fine-tuned with the US narrative. So reading the German press will not enrich your knowledge, definitely.
Right.
You need to go beyond the West to get deeper insights, and also to familiarize yourself with other views of this larger conflict. Ukraine is only one battlefield in that larger conflict, global conflict that we are having. And this larger conflict is the conflict between the West and the rest, I would say, with in Huntington's words. And it doesn't make such a great difference whether we look at the EU or at the United States. The EU is more or less a satellite, a vassal of the United States. It's the only guarantor for their survival, as the EU sees it at the moment. And the main threat for their survival is not only Russia, but the rising BRICS countries, above all Russia and China. Right. And therefore, this is the larger pattern of conflict where we should have a closer look on. And for me, it's really important to point out that the sooner both the US and the EU learn that we have to adapt to the new reality in this world, right, that we are entering a multipolar phase of this world. The earlier we can sit at the same table and negotiate good deals, to say it in Trump's words, to allow the West also to have a future in this multipolar world. But what we are seeing now is a US strategy of encapsulating the West, building a Western bloc, just as we had in the years before the Iron Curtain came down, an Eastern bloc. We tend to isolate ourselves through sanctions. And this is always a sign of weakness. You only isolate yourself from the rest of the world if you feel you cannot compete with the others out there any longer. This was the case in the late 80s when the Eastern Bloc then collapsed because it was not competitive any longer. And this is what we are seeing nowadays. The industry is going down, is leaving Germany, because in this encapsulation, isolation strategy, putting sanctions against those who should be our best partners, will leave us in free fall in terms of economy and also in terms of policy making, being part of defining the new rules, the new settings of the world order that is evolving at the moment.
Well, it's interesting. During the time of the East German dictatorship, when the Soviet Union was basically running East Germany, people in East Germany were called people in the land of the clueless because they had no information coming in. It was all totally controlled and censored. That's what we see today in the West. We're getting a narrative that comes from the City of London, that comes from the Wall Street bankers, and a picture that doesn't give them a sense of what's happening in the world. Now, I want to just mention one thing that you brought up, which is an important thing. If you go around the world, and I do a lot of meetings and discussions with people in the so-called Global South, interviews and so on. And what they want is the United States to be fair. They don't mind having to compete with the United States, but they've never been given that opportunity. In fact, when you talk to people in countries in Africa, you find they have the same view that most Americans have toward the government. Yeah. They like the American people, but they don't like the government. And in Germany, you have the same thing. The Scholz coalition, the Greens can't even get enough votes to get into state parliaments now. The Free Democrats, the so-called liberals who are with the Scholz coalition, they're collapsing. Yeah. And they're trying all kinds of desperate things. But the most, I'd like to ask Reiner about what's going on in the parliament in the discussion when Scholz, who famously said nothing to Biden about the Nord Stream pipeline being blown up, then Biden, or whoever runs Biden, right, obviously Blinken and others, said to Scholz, you're going to get long-range missiles from us that are nuclear capable that can target Russia. And in the 1980s, this led to an explosion of demonstrations. In fact, that's where the Greens became a party. Now the Greens are the supporters of nuclear war. So, Reiner, I'm just wondering, from your work in the parliament, is there going to be any opposition to Biden putting these missiles into Germany, making Germany a target of Russia?
I'm afraid times have changed. And there is not enough public consciousness any longer in Germany that this constitutes a major threat to our security in Western Europe, in Germany. I have seen a poll which showed that 47% of Germans, of the surveyed Germans, reject those long-range missiles to be located in Germany. But almost the same amount of people are in favor of them. So that means that people forgot the times of the Cold War when everybody was longing for improved relationships. Every politician was eager to build better relationships, was working for it. And nowadays, it seems that people feel they are on the moral high ground. The Russians are the culprits for everything going wrong in Europe and the world. And it's easy to point with the fingers at them. And the only way to protect ourselves against them is to place more and more missiles and weaponry around us. But they have totally forgotten that there should be a primacy of diplomacy. You first should try to find out what are the interests of your neighbor or of your opponent. And of course, you should know your own interests. And this is the problem already in German contemporary politics. We don't even understand our own interests in Germany. Yeah. But knowing the interests of the other side allows you to enter into dialogue and to find compromises and to make deals, again, in the words of Trump, and to create stable relationships, even if we have confronting interests, opposing interests. And this has been totally forgotten in our modern society. And that's why people are not even really afraid of war in that situation that we, for example, in Bavaria, train soldiers in the thousands from the Ukrainian army, which could be seen as an act of war, aggression against Russia. We give our tanks to the Ukrainian army to send them to Russian territory, and we do not even understand the danger which is looming above us. This is what really worries me. And in this environment, we as the Alternative for Germany and also the newly popping up party of Bündnis Sarah Wagenknecht, association around Sarah Wagenknecht, a left-wing politician, former communist, we are the only forces saying stop arms delivery, start diplomacy efforts immediately, and save lives and save peace in Europe. And this is very worrisome, because the next government will most likely be formed by the Christian Democratic Union, the party of Angela Merkel, and now Friedrich Merz, the BlackRock manager of Germany. And he's not at all interested in ending this proxy war of ending arms deliveries, because it's, of course, good money for the companies BlackRock has invested in. And so they are even more eager in escalating the situation. Rainer Rupp, a former NATO spy sent by GDR to Brussels, to the headquarters of NATO, he told me only recently he hopes and prays that Scholz will remain in power till the last day of this coalition, because he is a guarantor for peace. As crazy as it sounds, because this was the government that has sent billions in weapons delivery to Ukraine. But even worse is the perspective with Chancellor Friedrich Merz, maybe already end of next year. Yeah, I think it's a parallel process. Education, the whole education system has deteriorated in Germany. And definitely we just form part of this Western bubble of Western narratives, of Western explanations of the world around us. And we're not really able of taking the other side's view angle. And this is the most important thing. If you want to allow the young generation to understand the world, you need to look also at yourself from the other side's view angle. And for example, if you look at surveys in the Arabic countries of the Middle East, and you ask people who poses the greatest threat to the security of your country, around 70 to 80% will name Israel as the major threat, and a large number will name United States as a threat, and a much smaller number the Russians or the Chinese as a threat. So where does that come from? Surely it's not just propaganda, but it's the history that these countries have gone through those military interventions, which have destabilized the neighborhood of Europe and which are responsible for the flooding with migrants of Europe. And if you look at the education system or also the media narratives in Germany, they always coincide. There is no big difference between both of them. Then the West is portrayed always as promoting democracy and peace in the world all over. And if we ever intervene militarily somewhere else, it was just to stop evil dictators from doing their job of hatred, of bombing people, killing innocent people, and we wanted to bring democracy there. I mean, this is how the West sees itself. This is how also the textbooks in history in politics are filled. And how will that ever allow us to become a part of a multipolar world that you can take serious? This is not, and I'm not talking only about education in schools. This is also true for research at the university level. So the larger framework is set by politics, and it prescribes what you should, which trail you should follow. And then you get funding at universities, or you get promoted in your job. Your textbook will be sold everywhere in schools. So it is not really the understanding of science as a creation of knowledge, but it's rather a science of how to control people's minds through narratives. And this may work for a certain time in your own bubble, in our own bubble of the West. But sometime, sooner or later, you have to face the reality, because we are living in a world of free competition. And we can just observe then how we are being overtaken by China, by South Korea, even before, by Indonesia, Malaysia, by India in a while. And we will pay the price for that, because all the mistakes that we commit here in the West will have a price, and it will be very hard to catch up in that competitive sphere that we have now globally. And this education system is failing at the moment to produce citizens here who are really able to be partners in the new multipolar world.
Yep.
Blinken's stepfather was the attorney for Robert Maxwell, a Mossad, MI6, CIA agent. His father, Donald Blinken, was with Warburg Pincus, one of the leading globalist financial companies, and also a partner of George Soros when he was ambassador to Hungary.
Right.
That's where Blinken comes from, a product of Madeleine Albright. Now, to think that he is serious about peace or using America's power for the good, if you believe that, I've got a bridge I can sell you in Brooklyn. Now, the point here, what I'm trying to get at, is that what's been done to Germany is a consistent attack after World War II,
right,
to say that anyone who's proud to be German must be a Nazi. This was run out of the Great Britain, the Tavistock Institute, the Royal Institute of International Affairs, RUSI, the Royal United Services Institute, Chatham House, and so on.
Right.
And Chatham House, British intelligence, has a junior partner called the Council on Foreign Relations. And these are the people who argue that sovereignty is a threat to peace, and that governments which act in the interests of their people are a threat to peace, and that you need technocrats instead to govern, who govern on what basis? What's good for the billionaires? What's good for the corporate cartels? And this is what, when you look at Germany, the tragedy to me is the degree to which people have been brainwashed around CO2 and the whole green policy. And then you add to that the sanctions against Russia that cut off the cheap energy. Germany was the driver for Europe, the auto sector, the machine tool, engineering, science, and culture.
Yeah.
And Germany has a great, beautiful culture.
I know.
But if you're proud of it, you're suspected of possibly being a Nazi or hiding your sympathies with the old Third Reich. And so, and I see this with my children in school, that the attacks on the Alternative for Deutschland are just incredible.
Right.
Know? And so the same thing that we're fighting is who controls the narrative. Their goal is to detach everyone from reality so that you'll buy whatever is being pushed by the Wall Street Journal, the BBC, and so on.
Right.
And I think the fight that we're waging is starting to get through, and that's what terrifies them, the fact that the AFD won one of the three state parliamentary elections and was a close second in the other two. And they'll do anything to try and stop them. And that's why it's so important, I think, for you to have Reiner to come on and give Americans a picture of what's happening, because the demonization has been the same kind of demonization we see of the MAGA crowd in the United States.
Exactly.
Well, I'll answer that, and then Reiner can talk about that from Germany. This is something LaRouche identified in the period of the Nixon administration,
right,
when Kissinger was running it. And the end of the Bretton Woods system, the removal of a gold reserve system, the opening to what was then the Jimmy Carter administration. And who was the Carter administration? That was the Trilateral Commission.
Right, Brzezinski.
The Project 1980s, Brzezinski launching the Islamic card, initially against the Soviet Union, but also against Europe and the United States. And this is where Blinken and Sullivan and that whole crowd comes from.
Right.
Now, the important thing for them was that you have governments that are subservient to private special interests. And there was a very important book that very few people know about called The Twilight of Sovereignty, written by Walt Wriston, who was the head of Citibank. And he was one of the mentors of Robert Rubin, who helped to run the Clinton administration, the repeal of Glass-Steagall, the breakup of any kind of regulatory framework that was committed to growth, and the replacement of technocrats. And that's where, Klaus Schwab is a junior partner of this.
Right.
People should study Brzezinski's book on the technocratic society, Samuel Huntington's book on the clash of civilizations. And importantly, all of these people were students of a man named William Yandell Elliott, a Rhodes Scholar who pledged his loyalty to the United Kingdom and the City of London, as did Henry Kissinger.
Right.
And you see Britain today as a rust bucket and a broken down nation, but they still control the narrative, including in Germany.
Right.
And so I think this is where we really have to become nationalists at the same time world citizens.
Right.
That's correct. But I would say, let's do not think in such limited geographical terms, because you could also take a United States under a national development model as it had been proposed by Donald Trump, and it could also be a good partner of Germany and Russia, and maybe even China.
Right.
The real fight going on behind the scene, also behind the scene of this West against the rest competition, for me, is what you pointed out as steps on a staircase towards global government.
Right.
And it's all about who controls the future world order. We have now a model proposed by the BRICS countries where they say we remain sovereign nations, be they democratic or autocratic, so-called dictatorships, no matter what, but national entities who also preserve their culture, who protect their own economic interests, but they join forces, they make deals among each other, and they want to build a multipolar world. But what does the West want to achieve? The West is dominated by forces who want to get rid of the nation states.
Right.
Be they democratic or not, they don't care about democracy. They care about control, and not control only on a limited national level, but on a global level. And that is the threat at the moment, that those globalist forces, as I call them, keep control. They took control with Biden again from the hands of the American people, from the hands of Donald Trump. What I learned about the 2020 elections, they were stolen. I have seen enough evidence, at least for me, to make this assumption. And they have taken back this control. Why? Why was it so important? Why are they fighting so harshly against the coming back of Donald Trump. Why are they fighting so aggressively against Alternative for Germany? Because both stand for a national development model. And this is the basis for keeping up also democracy. You can only maintain democracy in a certain receptacle, I would say, in a certain container where people can communicate with each other because they share the same values and or the same language. In Switzerland, for example, they do not even have to share the same languages, but they share the same values. They, for example, defend their direct democracy, their votes directly on laws, on whatever. And this shall be abolished. And for that purpose, they need to heterogenize the populations through excessive migration. And this way, the European nations shall be erased. And sooner or later, people will give up thinking, okay, we're different, we're German, we're different, we're Spanish or whatever. They all share the same misery and think by throwing everything in one pot, they will then be able to act and defend their interests against the US, against Russia, against China. This is the narrative that you're being told over and over here. They create problems where they can tell you, look, you're too small as a nation state to react. The coronavirus was one hoax, which was very useful for that. The climate change hoax, I mean, there's climate change, but it's not driven by CO2. Maybe they will use another financial crisis to tell us, look, your currencies are not good. It needs to be CBDC currencies. They may even use war to destroy the nation states. But this is their direction of travel. And we could see it now with the WHO. There was all this debate in our circles, at least, about the dangers of the pandemic treaty. And then we learned, it was dropped. Oh, what a great success, we thought. And what has happened now in September in New York, they gave the Secretary General, Guterres, almost the same powers or even larger powers in every field. He can just call out a certain crisis and then form his own sort of government and make commandments for the whole community of nation states. This is a silent coup. And I mean, we have not tested it yet, but they are creating the framework already. And it's even an illusion to think that the danger is just imminent in the European Union with the Digital Services Act that you mentioned at the beginning. It was already reality in the COVID crisis from 2022 onwards. They had an artificial intelligence program called Social Listening, which analyzed in 9 different languages in 30 countries the social media content and tried to understand this way how disinformation was spreading and could be censored immediately. This was already, it has been tested already 4 years ago. And of course, their methodology is growing in efficacy. And this is a real danger for the coming years, that the globalists will gain so much power before the multipolar world becomes reality. And that's why this race is so aggressively being fought at the moment. They cannot afford another 4 years of Trump, because then they would lose this race. Yeah, that's totally correct. And it's not only about free speech. I would say the primary human right is the right of integrity of your body. Yeah. You yourself are the only one to decide what enters your veins and what doesn't. And there is a case in Germany, Alexander Bittner, a soldier who has been arrested a few weeks ago, just for having objected to the vaccination, the mRNA vaccination against COVID. I mean, nowadays we have learned from the Robert Koch Institute files, protocols, that they knew that there was never a proof of protection against COVID through that vaccine. But soldiers in the German army, in the Bundeswehr, were obliged to accept, to tolerate this violation of your right of integration, of bodily integrity. I don't know how you call it.
Right, yes, that's good.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
And now he went to jail after it had already been publicly made clear that the vaccination never served its primary purpose, at least concerning their propaganda, to protect the elderly, the ill people, etc. And this really, for me, is very, very worrisome. If after knowing the truth, you are still judged by the courts according to the former lies. And this just leaves you as a citizen in total despair, because you always thought that the truth, once it has come out, can display its full power. But it can't. The system can do whatever it wants, and it is not accountable to the citizen anymore. And this is really very, very worrisome. And of course, also in the field of free speech. They can label anything as hate speech, and you pay thousands of euros, and in your police record, then it says, okay, you are a criminal. Right. And they, of course, can censor everything. They can take away your YouTube channel with hundreds of thousands of users, like they did with Kenneth M a few years ago, where I also gave many interviews. And this leaves you just scared. You're feeling powerless. And this has the consequence that you, in your inside, you quit. You give up the belief, the trust in democracy. And this is a major damage to our civilization. People are leaving the system. They don't feel like, I should invest in Germany, I should work for the good of the country, I should pay taxes because I trust they are used in the best possible way for our country. People are just desperate. And that is the real harm, because this way people do not cherish democracy any longer, because it has become obviously dysfunctional.
Well, a couple things I'll just say on that. One is that the decision to destroy Germany was in the late 1800s with the formation of the emergence of the geopolitical doctrine of Halford Mackinder speaking to the Royal Geographic Society. And it was this idea that you could never allow a German-Russian alliance. And the idea of Eurasia has to be broken apart into pieces. Now, these are the same people that our founding fathers fought and defeated to make the United States. The United States was the first successful anti-colonial revolution, and it was constantly attacked, constantly. We've had presidents assassinated, and in fact, the assassination of Kennedy was the real turning point in the 20th century. And the fact that that's still covered up. Now, on the other hand, what I'm seeing more and more is that they're overplaying their hand. The people we're fighting against, the globalists, they're not that smart. They have a strategy, and their strategy is to use disinformation and malinformation to weaken the courage of people so that no one will fight. But people are fighting. We've just talked about a number of people who have taken it upon themselves. Just one example that you're familiar with, Mel, is the case of Scott Ritter.
Oh,
right. This is not just something in Europe. You know, the fact that this man who is an honest fighter, you may not agree with him on everything, but he is a committed partisan of the idea of America representing something real and important.
Right.
And they raided him. They did the same thing to Lyndon LaRouche in 1986. Right. So the question then is, what happens when the narrative runs up against reality? And that's what's happening in Eastern Germany. That's why the voters are turning against the existing government. That's why the AfD is making progress, because you have people who are speaking out, even though they're being accused of being Nazis for speaking out. Now, the question that we at the LaRouche organization always ask, do the Americans have the moral fitness to survive? Are we going to go along to get along and lose everything that's been built over the 200 and something years of our history? And that's what the election in 30 days is about. You know, Harris is not so much a ghost. She was a product of a coup after it became clear that Biden could barely walk and keep his fly zipped.
Right.
And by bringing Harris in, they could create a new narrative, the younger, more vibrant personality. She can hardly finish a sentence. That's why they don't let her do interviews.
Right.
And the problem is not Biden or Harris. The problem is the people behind them.
Right.
The ones who choose the Anthony Blinkens and the Susan Rices and the Samantha Power, who are the ones who are the controlling influences over these people. Same thing in Germany. The question, who runs Schultz? Who runs the Greens? You know, if you trace back far enough, you find that the Greens were an operation, at least ideologically, of British science against German science. So, you know, the question that's posed to all of us is, do we have the courage to face the truth? And this is going to come up in the next months after the election. What happens in Ukraine? Sergei Lavrov did a press statement yesterday to Newsweek magazine, where the line is that, well, Zelensky's going to fall soon and there'll be some kind of negotiations. And that's coming from the Financial Times in London. Lavrov said, look, this is going to continue until the West decides it cannot impose its unipolar order on the world. And I think that's what Reiner's talking about when he says we've got to look at the rest of the world and the BRICS and these countries that have legitimate security and economic interests. That's what Putin was saying from the beginning about Ukraine, that Russia had legitimate security interests that the West wouldn't take up.
Right.
So if we're going to have peace, you have to recognize that countries do have legitimate interests. They may differ from what you want, but you can talk about it.
Right.
And that's what has to happen. And that's why, to me, this is a moment in history that we're moving from one historic epoch, going back 500-600 years, the colonial imperial epoch, to a new era. And the West better get accustomed to that, because the unipolar order is dead, whether you know it or not.
Yes, of course, you can find me on YouTube, on Telegram. But my last word to your audience would just be, I ask you, my dear brothers and sisters in the US, at the 5th of November, please stand up, vote, and please also make sure that election integrity is ensured. Please don't allow any longer that your votes are being stolen. Really, this is so important, because it would give the whole world another pause to breathe. Should the Biden regime, continued by Kamala Harris, topple over democracy, over your vote? But you need to make sure that it really counts. And I really hope that you will make it. And I hope that I can wake up on November the 6th and see that everything has changed again and we can head towards world peace and a multipolar world.
Well, I do a daily update that's posted at the LaRoucheOrganization.com. That's LaRouche organization.com. It's 10 to 12 minutes. I try to summarize current events from the standpoint of history, because history is the key And the history has been taken away from us. It's been distorted and destroyed. And we, the people, if we're going to make sure there's change, it comes down to the people. And we need citizens who understand that ultimately it's your future that's at stake. Don't expect Donald Trump to do all the work. You've got to do the work too.